attempt to answer your questions or to fob them off on staff for the hard ones. Yes.
You've got, it looks like 8, maybe 9 people in IUC Columbus out of more than 600 districts. So what does that say? These districts just didn't understand, or is there any more to say about intent? Because it seems like the vast majority knew what to do based on your own findings.
Well, I could not have made that point any better than you did in your question. The good news, the good news is that most of the school districts in Ohio are playing by the rules. They're clean. They're doing it right. Now, I've heard it protested that these rules are ambiguous and they're hard to understand, and people were either confused or didn't know what to do. That doesn't wash with me because we had such good compliance throughout the vast majority. If they were that ambiguous, if they were that hard to figure out, then I would have expected many, many more errors and more schools that showed up in that scrubbing category. What that tells me, everybody else was able to do it. It must be clear enough to be able to comply.
So what does that say about those 9 then? Or what can you surmise?
Well, my conclusion is that they knew better, and for whatever their own reasons were, they chose not to comply.
Yeah. Would you recommend that the leadership in this district actually serve prison time or jail time out of this?
Well, I haven't been a prosecutor for a couple of years, so I don't get to recommend sentences, and that's
your personal recommendation is what I'm asking. Do you think these people should be held accountable by going to jail for what they did?
That's ultimately for a judge to decide. I'm an auditor, and I speak to the things that I find. I don't get to exercise that judgment. That's for another officer, and I guess I'm not going to invade their province with my opinion.
Should there be discipline within the individual school districts once they get this and identify it? Pink slips, anyone getting fired?
It seems to me that there are facts in several school districts that would support disciplinary action should the school board choose to take it. Remember that any personnel action, folks, ought to take into account the entire career of an individual. Somebody that's been there for 25 years and may have been tangentially related to this, it's not outside the realm of possibility that wisdom might indicate something other than an absolute termination. I'm not going to make a blanket determination.
Let me ask it this way. Do you expect criminal charges to come out of some of this?
I expect that we will make criminal referrals to state and or federal prosecutors in the Columbus case.
Dave, can you put Toledo, Cincinnati, and the other school districts that are on this list and contrast them to Columbus? Why is Columbus under federal and state investigation and these other districts not? What's the big difference here?
The kind and quantity. We've conducted numerous interviews at this point. We are developing a very good picture of what was going on in Columbus, and we haven't seen those kind of developments, that kind of evidence elsewhere in the state.
Does it appear to you that Superintendent Gene Harris was aware that these things were going on? That would be one question. The second question related to Cincinnati, you kind of singled them out for saying in your interview that they knew what they were doing was wrong. I guess they didn't like the rules. Does that rise to the same kind of level as the transgressions in Columbus? So, Smith, what do you think about her awareness too? Tell me more about Cincinnati. Who told you that?
Well, one of the differences is the ad hoc decision-making that happened in Columbus, picking and choosing, versus the operation of a rule in Cincinnati. Cincinnati basically told us they didn't like ODE's rules, so they made up their own. So that's different in Cincinnati. It's different in Marion, for the same reason. With regards to your first question, I have no comment.
Can you talk a little bit more about this state? I think what you said earlier was at the very least ODE, you found insufficient oversight of the reporting.
Yes.
Is that right? I mean, how far did you investigate the Department of Education, and what is their role in this, their culpability, their actions?
And that's why I spent a little bit of time talking about Ohio's tradition of local control. Under the current statutory scheme, it is difficult for ODE to do the job that we would intuitively expect them to do. At the same point, there were certainly warning signs that, in my opinion, could have been looked into. ODE is not on record as having gone to the General Assembly and asked for changes in the statutory mechanisms.
So now that you're finished, one, do you have anything new in this report regarding Cleveland, and how would you rate Cleveland's offenses in regards to some of these others?
Well, I don't know that I have a very good way to rank these things, so I'm going to decline the opportunity to do that. With Cleveland, is there anything new? Yes. As a matter of fact, originally in our first interim report, we have gone in and looked for over 3,000 records that were indicated by the sorting mechanism we used in the first phase. Cleveland was unable to provide that information. In this phase, we went back and we narrowed that scope because one of the issues in Cleveland is they've had some management turnover. It's a very large system, and we were nervous that the people we were talking to said that there there were no records, but that there might be records existing somewhere else in the system, and that the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing, so to speak. We collapsed the request to something under 300. Mark, was it Jason?
210.
How many?
210.
210 student files, and we looked at them. We found, as you'll see in the report, a significant number of errors, exceptions, as we call them, and as a fail-safe to make sure that we had all the information we were going to be able to get, we issued a subpoena to Cleveland, and their lawyer responded to us that there would be no additional information provided in response to our subpoena. Our conclusion then is the same as it was in the fall, that Cleveland is unauditable. However, because of the items you'll see in the report, it was clear that there was evidence of scrubbing, so we let that finding stand.
Any changes in Toledo on that same level?
We did not use that process in Toledo.
If we're recommending any discipline action for Toledo schools? Or?
You know, Toledo self-reported early in this process, and you know, the facts are a little bit different on the ground in Toledo than they were elsewhere. What the Inspector General concludes at the U.S. Department of Education, I can't really predict.
Auditor Yost, you've got your three largest districts in the state. One where you said one didn't seem like the one hand knew the other. That's Cleveland. Cincinnati deciding they wanted their own, and Columbus now with criminal charges. What is that saying? Does that say anything greater about what's going on with your urban districts in this state?
Well, I don't know that it does, because you can look at the city of Akron, the city of Dayton, the city of Youngstown.
But those are your three largest.
I don't know that you can conclude anything. We have you know, smaller districts. Lockland is on the list. Northridge is on the list. So I don't know that the size or the nature of the school district really means very much. Dr. Lavartu, I don't know if you did a stratus sorting and analysis. I don't know if you'd like to add anything to that. Please come up. I've always wanted to ask a PhD a question in front of everybody, because I spent my whole university and grad school career getting asked questions I couldn't answer in front of the class.
Yeah, it's my turn, I guess. So he was concerned about this from the beginning. Is this, are we focusing on urban schools? And is this an urban thing? And so he told us that he wanted to be very careful, that he could draw inferences about all school types, right? And so the procedure in phase 2, where they looked at those districts with schools on the levies, or districts with on the ballot, we created a methodology, I guess, that would ensure that we have representation in terms of types of schools, elementary, middle, and high, and district demographics. And I guess you could say to a significant extent, this is concentrated in larger urban districts, but there's a lot of error here. And like he said, there are small districts who appear to have engaged in this, and there are large districts, so it's hard to generalize.
Thank you.
Dave, back to the Department of Education, there was evidence in Toledo, and I think a couple in Cleveland at one point, of the districts reaching out to the Department of Education saying, can you clarify what the policy is here? And they either got incomplete answers or no answers at all. Was it a case where the Department of Education couldn't answer that question, or did it choose not to?
I would direct that to the Ohio Department of Education to answer. One of the things we had difficulty, we looked to try to assess whether there was a systemic failure to advise outside the EMIS manual, and we were unable to really nail that down.
You weren't able to confirm that those questions were asked?
Correct.
During the Columbus investigation, you said that during the process you had some problems with the investigation, whether it be intimidation, any of those factors. Did you have any more of that with these other districts?
I'm not aware, let me just check. Bob, Mark, are you aware of any place other than Columbus where we had a pushback or people being called in after interviews for re-interview?
I would say we've got pushback in that we question certain transactions, we tested results, but we didn't get the intimidation to the degree that we've had in Columbus and place else.
So only one district.
Yes.
Will you be asking any of these districts to reimburse the state for some of the cost of this work?
Great question. There was an earmark for, in the last biennial budget, we're in the last 6 months, I guess, of that biennial budget now, that was earmarked for performance audits of school districts in fiscal distress. We had anticipated more districts actually ending up in that condition than actually occurred. So the costs of this have been funded through that earmark at the Department of Education. And other than the special audit at Columbus, I don't anticipate asking other school districts to shoulder that.
But you will be asking Columbus?
From the time that it became a special audit separate, the work that we did in Columbus prior to that, I don't recall, that might have been in October.
I can get you that date.
We have a specific date, but prior to that date, the state is funding that as a proper state oversight cost. As it has developed into more the nature of a special audit, we're treating it as a special audit paid by the audit team.